So we left off at the end of the 19th century, crossing over into the 20th century with China morally decimated in a failed attempt to purge out foreign influence, which resulted in absolute and utter foreign dominance. Again, not physically. No one's physically coming in and taking over anything besides major trade cities. They were leaving the day-to-day running of the destroyed country to the corrupt Manchu government. Now let's talk about what happens in the 20th century, because it is 100 years of an amazing turnaround, but it's not going to start any better than it finished in the 19th century. And that is that the 20th century is not much kinder for the first half for China. As I've tried to set the stage now, the place has fallen apart. And this has happened in the past. This is not anything revolutionary for China in terms of, oh, it's just had a 5,000-year continuous history of awesomeness. As I've said at least 10 times, dynasties have come and gone. Strong emperors have been followed by weak emperors. Things have gone from great to terrible. So this is not abnormal. It's all cyclical. And the cycle's now done for the Manchus, because they have become so terrible at what they do that even the regular people who may have supported them on again, off again for the last couple hundred years before this point have given up. I mean, everybody's given up. And what is also cyclical in Chinese history is when the central authority fails, power arises in subunits of China. Meaning when the main government starts to stink or suck, when the emperor sucks and the dynasty's getting ready to crash, what happens is that local, what we call warlords or strong men or powerful leaders or figures in different subsections of China will rise up to the challenge, and they'll challenge the central government. And this, at the end here of the 19th century going into the 20th century, this is no exception. Again, this has happened many times in Chinese history. In fact, look up the Warring States period of Chinese history a couple thousand years ago for really, 3,000 years ago. No, 2,500 years ago, for really interesting look at this same concept, and that is the central government collapses and local warlords start to dominate areas, sub-states as it were, and then they start warring with each other. That's another era, but it happens at this point too. So early 20th century in China sees a rise of warlords, people teasing out sub-states and saying, the central government's nothing, they suck. So I'm going to raise up my own militia. I'm a strong business person, or I'm a local military person, and I'm in control of the military here, or I can buy control of the military, and we're going to start our own little state here, and we'll collect taxes, and we'll behave as if we're a sovereign state, because the central government can't do nothing. So the center crumbles, warlords and sub-states start to rise, and they are warring with each other. Again, very typical for human behavior. And everybody agrees, warlord-driven states or not, that the central government's got to go. It should have probably died a century earlier. By 1912, everyone is convinced that the Manchus got to go. And by the way, another word for Manchu is, I want to say Qing or Qing. I always say Qing. It's Qing. The Qing Dynasty is the same as Manchu. I just like the word Manchu better. I'm not sure what's more or less offensive to Chinese people. So the last Qing emperor was removed from the throne in 1912. That is, everybody said, forget about it. We're going to have a new country. We're going to try to put our house back in order, but it's not going to be with this imperial line. And, more important than that, it's not going to be with an imperial line at all. That's important. Jot that down in your notes. In 1912, it's the last emperor. In fact, maybe you've even heard of a Bernardo Bertolucci, a movie called The Last Emperor. They got rid of the emperor himself, which was a child at the time. The kid was like 5 years old or 2. They just didn't get rid of the kid, though. They said, we're never doing that again. We will not have a king / an emperor / a monarchical line anymore. We're done with that type of system. It served us well for 3,000 to 4,000 years, but we're all done with that now. You have to remember, in this time of semi-chaos and crumbling of the central state, there were lots of people who were fighting for different ideas of how they should rule their state. And we're also I always say, keep the timeline in context. This is now 1900. even late 1800s, into 1900, 1910, 1920. The world is changing. China's disintegrating, but the world around them ain't. And so these other systems have been rising up, namely this one in the United States called having like a republic and a democracy, and that idea spreads to Europe. So democracies are on the rise. Lots of different states all around the world have gotten rid of monarchies, have deposed their kings and queens. Even Russia, one of the laggards, finally had a Russian Revolution in 1917, and they said, we're going to get rid of the kings and queens and have communism. So lots of competing ideas from within China itself saying, well, we're getting rid of the old way, but what way should we adopt? And there were those who said, that American one looks pretty good. A republic. We should have a republic. We'll name it the Republic of China. Well, they were called the Nationalists. The Nationalist Party said, we should do something like what the Western governments are doing, right? Have some sort of representative something, but we're going to get rid of the monarchy either way. The opposing view, again, this is 1912, 1915, 1917, Russian Revolution. In the 19-teens, there were other people who were talking about communism. Communism was an idea that wasn't just Russian. In fact, it was written by a couple of Germans, was it not? And so when the Russian Revolution happened in 1917, that offered another prospect, another possibility for how to run a country that wasn't unknown. Again, thinkers in China were thinking about it too. So all throughout this period, say 1900 to 19-teens and 1920s, people were saying, what should we do? Some said a republic. Some said a communist something or another. I think you know some of the names here that were involved. The folks that said we want to have a republic, and it's referred to as ROC, Republic of China. They were the Nationalist Party, led by a guy named Chiang Kai-shek. Jot it down. Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the nationalist movement, who wanted to have a Republic of China. And their movement later will be called the ROC, Republic of China. Okay? The opposing side was led eventually by a guy named Mao Zedong. I bet you've heard of Mao. I bet you've heard of Chairman Mao as well. And they, of course, wanted to do that communist thing. They said, hey, that looks pretty good. You know, we're mostly an agrarian society. We mostly grow food. We're not as developed industrially. We have a lot of people. We have a lot of manpower. We should try to make an equal society where we all work together to move from agrarian society to an industrial society. That's going to take all of us. It's going to take teamwork. That's what the Russians are doing, and they were doing it quite successfully in the 1920s, by the way. So Mao Zedong and his peeps said, we should do this communist thing. Given what our society is, we should try this. These two entities, and there were other parties and other people who thought of other things as well, by the way. Look up Sun Yat-sen, by the way. I think he's the one who started the whole Republican movement in China. But these are the two major forces that end up competing for power in China in the 19-teens, in the 1920s, in the 1930s, in the 1940s. But I'm getting ahead of myself. These are the entities that are saying, we're going to fight for the heart and soul of China. All the other ideas will go away. It's going to be these two. Is it going to be a republic, or is it going to be communist? A republic that's something like democracy, capitalist, or should it be communist? The Nationalist Party does well early on. You know, they're competing for ideas. They're competing ideologically with the people. There's propaganda. It's a political movement where you're trying to get people to join your political party. There's rallies. There's talks. And there's fights. And there are open conflict between these parties. And some of these parties say, hey, go to local warlords. Remember, there's no effective central government at this point. In 1912, everybody agreed to throw out the last emperor. So there's really not a central government. It's there in name only. I mean, I don't even know how it worked for international relations. If the United States wanted to come have a treaty with China, I don't even know who the hell would have signed it. Probably nobody. They just would have said, well, we're mostly dealing with Hong Kong. We'll just go talk to the local leader of Hong Kong. So there's no effective government at this time, and these two entities are battling it out for the heart and soul of the country. The Nationalists do the best early on. Under Chiang Kai-shek, a very successful military leader, good with propaganda, also good with organizational skills, and had a vision. And his vision was, commies are bad. And we want our country to be a democracy, and I will go out and court help from the United States, which he did. Sun Yat-sen, again, the guy who started the movement, actively went around Europe and the United States saying, hey, we want to make China into a country like you guys. Help us out. So Western countries were already semi-supporting Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek in this movement to consolidate control and central government in China. And the communists, of course, were supported by the Ruskies and other communist states. And so collisions did occur internally. However, it's still a disorganized society. But by 1928, Chiang Kai-shek was pretty good at going to local warlords and courting them and maybe even bribing them and saying, hey, dudes, here's some, what do you guys want? What do you want to join our team? What do you want to help us consolidate China? We'll give you local power. We'll make you a local mayor if you want. Whatever it takes to get you guys on board. By 1928, Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalists had mostly defeated communist forces, organized military communist forces who were fighting them, and had worked up enough of the warlords to back them, mostly in the north, to kind of unite China for a while. And I want to say 1928 to maybe 1935. I'm really not that concerned with the exact dates. I just want you to know that, yeah, the Nationalists had the early lead in this fight for China's soul. And for several years, kind of had a central government. But that don't mean that they had purged out foreign influence. That don't mean that they controlled Chinese economy, because they didn't. And that don't mean that there wasn't foreign interventions which were still threatening the Chinese state, because there were. And in 1934 to 1935, the commies and the nationalists were having like a final battle. They were like, oh, Chiang Kai-shek said, I hate commies so much. There's still pockets of them, still pockets of resistance around China. So we're going to lead our people to go destroy the last remnants of the communists. And therefore, we can now take hold of our control of our country in its entirety. And they actually surrounded them. I don't know exactly what city it was. I want to say it was outside Shanghai, but in some sort of ruse, some sort of political skullduggery, they convinced all these communists to come out to this one place. The nationalist forces surrounded them. They had every intention of massacring everybody, and in one final blow, destroying the communist movement. And some of the communists, Mao Zedong was leading them at the time. A bunch of the communists said, hey, we'll hang out here and sacrifice ourselves so that the political communist leadership can escape, including Mao Zedong. And they did that, and a bunch of people got killed, a lot of them. But the political leadership and a bunch of other followers escaped this certain death scenario and went on what was called the Long March. I'm telling you this because it's important to understand Chinese mentality towards Mao, even in today's 21st century world. This ragtag bunch of commies that had basically lost. They had lost the war. And most of their people just got annihilated in a final battle. But this small ragtag group escaped, and they went on this long march where they were basically scrambling around the countryside on foot or any mode of locomotion they could get, while the nationalist forces were chasing them down. A well-armed, large group of military people were hunting them down. And they were going through mountainous passes and swamps, and I think they went to Hunan at one point, to Chongqing, and then went through the mountains north and ended up escaping up to central northern China, probably close to the Inner Mongolian border, in some fairly arid places that they could hide out in, essentially, and reorganize themselves. Now, that in and of itself is amazing that this movement survived, but then went on to reorganize itself, and it did it at an exceptionally opportune time. This builds into the mythology of why people in China love Mao Zedong. He's a mythological figure, okay? Yes, he's a man, but he did so many things and survived the odds so greatly that he is beyond being just a human, right? So let me get back to the story. The commies and Mao Zedong escape, go on this long march, set up camp up north. For all practical purposes, the communist movement is dead. Chiang Kai-shek and his group get on with the job of running the country. However, that was not to be, because the Japanese, they haven't finished in their conquest to take over China. And they're sitting and watching the Civil War. And at one point they say, look, this looks like a perfect internal chaos time to go ahead and fulfill our dream of taking over China. And that's what they started to do in 1937. The Japanese army attacks China. Within 1 year, by 1938, Japanese forces control most of the eastern seaboard of China. which you now know is the main deal for China. It's where most of the people are, it's where all the big cities are, it's where all the trade is, it's where the economy is. And Japan controls that. Physically now controls it. I told you that these foreign forces didn't physically come in to take over China until now. And the Japanese did have ultimate designs, and maybe you remember this from the Japanese lecture. They did have ultimate designs on being the Asian leader, of replacing China as the core foundational stone of Asian civilization, specifically East Asian civilization, and being the main power that had colonies throughout the rest of Asia. Remember, Japan is modeling itself after the European countries. And the European countries become strong, get a big military, and go take over Africa, and the Americas, and India. And Japan said, well, we're going to do that too. We're strong enough. China's weak. We will take over China. And that will become our central location that then we then sweep across and eventually even take over India. Remember, the Japanese were going to take over Australia, Southeast Asia, and India. Who knows how far that would have gone. But they certainly did succeed by 1938, of controlling China. At the time, Chiang Kai-shek and his group were still in existence. Remember, they had kind of cobbled together a central government in the mid-30s while they were fighting the civil war with the communists, and then they defeated the communists. It looked like they were progressing, and they had support from, say, the United States and European countries. But the United States and European countries, by this point in history, are starting to be worried about this guy called Hitler over in Europe. So they're not paying attention to what's going on in China that much because the Europeans are already starting to fight Hitler, and that starts in the 1940s, of course. World War II, we call it. Look it up if you haven't heard of it. And they don't have a lot of time to help out Chiang Kai-shek with this mess that's going on with the Japanese occupation of China. It wasn't geopolitically or strategically important to fighting the Nazis. Then, of course, the Japanese made several mistakes, like siding up with Hitler. That's usually a bad thing to do. And then attacking America at Pearl Harbor. Oops, another really categorically bad thing to do. So Japan's going to get its ass handed it soon enough. But let me back up to history here for China. From 1937 to 1945, yes, that's the end of World War II, Japan occupies China. Full occupation of all the major cities. And what's important to our story of Mao Zedong and communism and Chiang Kai-shek and all these guys is that during this period, Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalists don't do anything. They don't do anything. Chiang Kai-shek, you know what? It was a calculated move. It was not a bad move. It's a calculated move, and he lost. But Chiang Kai-shek looked at the war, and he said, oh, man, okay, so the Japanese have a stronger military than us. So we can fight them and try to repel them out of China, but that's going to cost us a lot. It's going to cost us a lot of lives, a lot of money, a lot of our guns. And quite frankly, I don't think Japan can win in the long term because Japan just attacked America, so America's going to beat the crap out of Japan. And Japan allied itself with Nazi Germany. The world is going to beat Japan for us. So me, Chiang Kai-shek, I ain't going to do it. It's too costly. So we're going to sit on the sidelines and wait this one out because I mostly just hate commies. And we didn't succeed at crushing Mao Zedong and all of his forces yet. So I'm more worried about the communists taking over power in China once all this mess is over. So I'm not going to do anything. Can you imagine that? Sat out World War II. Sat out Japanese occupation of China because he said we want to save our money and guns to fight the commies. Okay? Again, I'm not making fun of him. It was a calculated risk. It makes sense given the situation. But it was a bad calculated risk, and here's why. The nationalists do nothing. The communist cause chaos in China in a good way. The communist forces led by Mao Zedong, again, after the Long March, after they reorganized themselves, after they started gaining local support and rallying communist support across the country, they say this is unacceptable. We are not going to sit idly by while Japanese soldiers take over our country and kill millions of us. And you probably know this from a past lecture as well. 20 or 30 or 40 million Chinese people died during the Japanese occupation. It was horrific. It was possibly the biggest genocide in human history. that's long forgotten because it was during World War II and everybody was concentrating on Europe. So the communists say, we're not going to sit idly by. We're going to use our money and guns to try to cause chaos with the Japanese military. We know we can't fight them outright. We can't compete with them. They got too big of guns and tanks and too many men here. And their technology is better than ours. So it was mostly a guerrilla movement, a guerrilla campaign to blow up railroad lines, to steal stuff from the Japanese military, to attack them in kind of almost American revolutionary sorts from behind trees and rocks, to basically just pinprick the Japanese army as much as you could to cause them consternation, to cause them to waste energy, to cause them to move troops over into places where the communists are attacking them, and thus drawing their forces away from other critical places. So this is a calculated move by the communist stuff. We got nothing to lose, and we're for motherland. We're going to fight for the motherland. We don't even care about the nationalists right now. We want Japan is the enemy. We need to get them. What this does over time during the 1940s is this makes local people say, wow, who's fighting for our country? Chiang Kai-shek, they ain't doing nothing. The local warlords, they ain't doing nothing. The nationalist movement ain't doing nothing. The communists are. So people start to like the communists. Do you see why China has started to go communist at this time? The communists were doing something. The communists were fighting for national pride and for control of their own country. So the communist movement starts to gain popularity. Local people start giving money and supplies and food to communist troops. The communist movement starts gaining followers. Their army gets bigger. Do you see where the story is going? So by the end of World War II, at the very tail end of it, there was a very brief united effort by the communists and nationalists. The leaders of both teams said, hey, look, the Japanese are on the ropes. America has entered the war and is blowing up Japan. Let's work together. Put the Civil War aside. Let's work together to clean up the Japanese presence here. And they did. In 1946, a united effort between the nationalists and communists ejected out the rest of the Japanese forces. Now, Civil War back on. Okay, they're gone, so now we can have our Civil War again that we were having. But the situation is now extremely different. The Communist Party is exceptionally strong. Again, think about the mythology around Mao Zedong now. He has survived imminent death. His movement did the Long March. It's an epic journey. It's almost like George Washington crossing Valley Forge. I mean, it's epic in that you can't believe that they survived the odds. The American Revolution should have been killed 1,000,000 times over. Washington himself should have been killed 1,000,000 times over. Same thing with Mao Zedong. Should have died, should have died, should have died, kept the movement alive, became a national hero, fought against the Japanese, and bam, Civil War back on, communist win. That, my friends, is why Mao Zedong is looked upon as the father of the country. That, my friends, is why China went communist. It wasn't that every single Chinese person really thought the Russians were doing it right. It was more situational than that. And the Communist Party ends up winning the Civil War mostly because of the goodwill it generated during World War II. By 1949, the Civil War is officially over. The Communists defeat the Nationalist Party. The Nationalists withdraw to the island of Taiwan. There it is again. Taiwan creeps back into every storyline here. Hold on to that thought. We'll get to it in a minute. 1949, the Republic of China is established under Mao Zedong and the communists. And Mao says, we have stood up. The period of humiliation is over. That's a quote. I'll give it to you again. Quote. We have stood up. The period of humiliation is over. Mark time, it's 1949. Okay? So Republic of China, under the communists, have unified China, ejected the Japanese, who are now defeated after World War II, not a threat anymore. The Japanese had basically ejected all the Europeans, so the Europeans are now gone as well. All foreign influence, most foreign influence is out of China. They have unified the communist government and the communist military was strong enough to subdue local warlords. So, boom, 1949, we have a singular sovereign state once more with a singular government which actually has control over the entire sovereign state that we now call China. Got it? Thus, the end of the period of humiliation. In summary, thing 3 that I started with an hour ago is China totally sucked from about 1750 to about 1950, 1949 to be exact. That period of humiliation coincides with the rise of the United States, the history of the United States, the rise and domination of the world of the European powers, and that's why this exact lining up of major world regions, many of which became really rich while China got really poor in this exact 200 years, is why we're looking at China today going, wow, this is crazy. China's getting rich. China's going to be a world power. China's important. No. It's just returning to its rightful place after a 200-year bad spell. That makes sense? Let's get back to our story, though. We were talking about, just said something about a bunch of the nationalists go to retreat to Taiwan? Yeah, let's get to that with thing 4. What's the deal with Taiwan and Tibet?